Money needs to be divisible, durable, recognizable, portable, and scarce.
None of those characteristics are relevant if you don't start off with an actual commodity, with an actual store value.
Gold is sound money for a non-digital future. Bitcoin is sound money for a digital future.
You're making an argument just because we have a digital economy that we don't need real money anymore. We can have fake digital money.
So Bitcoin has 0% industrial use value, but this is a feature, not a bug. This makes Bitcoin the world's only pure money.
That's a negligible percentage. The number one use case for Bitcoin is speculation.
Let me ask you, Peter, do you hold physical gold?
I have physical gold, yes.
Okay,
but that's
why don't you just keep it all with the custodian?
Because I want to have some readily available, just in case I need it.
Exactly.
Right.
In Nixon's August of '71 speech, he said we're temporarily detaching the dollar from gold. So
Yes,
it's still a broken promise. Politicians are still liars. Let's get that on record.
Nothing more
please.
permanent than a temporary government solution, as they say.
Thank you. Yes. My guest today is Peter Schiff, the host of the Peter Schiff Show podcast and author of How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes, along with Robert Breedlove. He hosts the What is Money podcast and is author of Bitcoin and the Tyranny of Time Scarcity. Today we'll be discussing the utility of Bitcoin through the Austrian lens or the free market lens. Gentlemen, I want to start with where we agree. Explain our justifications for why we have such beliefs on what money is, the role of the state, and then slowly see where we diverge. Starting with Mr. Schiff, what is inflation? What is it that people need to know about inflation?
Yeah, well, inflation is an expansion of the supply of money. And so when you have government that is basically creating currency as opposed to money, and there's a difference that we can get into between currency and money, when the government expands the supply of the currency in circulation, that's inflation. When it contracts the supply, that's deflation. And, the government has been inflating the money supply rather aggressively, particularly beginning in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, when we went with quantitative easing, which is, just really a euphemism for inflation, because that's what quantitative easing is when the Federal Reserve creates money and then buys up government bonds or mortgages, and money supply or currency supply increases. And the effect of that is that prices go up, and it offsets a decline in prices that might otherwise have resulted from an efficient, growing free market economy, where the tendency is for prices to come down over time. Governments can rob people of those benefits by creating inflation. And so inflation is not just how much prices go up. I mean, that's not just the result. It's how much they might have otherwise gone down had the government not created the inflation that caused them to go down less or to go up. And right now, we've created so much inflation, and especially, since COVID, and we continue, prices are now rising at a very alarming rate. And that's going to continue for, as far as the eye can see right now.
Mr. Breedlove, what is inflation? What do people need to know about inflation?
I think Peter's hit all the main points, right? It's the arbitrary expansion of a currency supply under the monopoly of a central bank. People often get confused between monetary inflation versus price inflation, but monetary inflation is the expansion of that actual currency supply. And then price inflation tends to be the consequence of that. And also, I'll agree with Peter that currency is an application of money. It's not the money itself. I actually think the application of currency and the story behind it highlights why gold ultimately doesn't work as money. So we can get into more of that later. But in general, I'd like to, I don't know when you want to do this, but I'd like to just frame up my argument for gold versus Bitcoin, because in my view, it's not actually an either or. It's really just a weighting of what type of future you see. Like, do you see a digital future emerging for mankind, or do you see a non-digital future? And I think basically the way you see that future emerging determines which tool, gold or Bitcoin, will serve your purposes.
A couple of quick points I wanted to make is I don't think there's such a thing as price inflation. I think that Keynesians like to talk about that, but prices don't inflate. I mean, prices go up and they go down, but that's not inflating. Inflating is expanding. You don't really expand a price. So prices could rise. But I think governments and Wall Street and academia tries to confuse the public, talking about price inflation, to get people to think that it's the prices that are the problem, or the greedy businesses that are raising the prices. It's trying to deflect attention from the real source of inflation, which is the government itself. But yeah, I mean, I think that we don't have to agree as to whether, the future is going to be more digital. I mean, of course it is. I mean, computers are going to be here. They're going to make our lives better. We're going to have more things that are going to be done and automated. And whether or not gold or Bitcoin are going to be, what their roles are going to be, I think is irrelevant to that discussion. I concede that we're going to have a digital economy, but it doesn't mean that we're not going to have to eat. So we still need food. So we can't just have digital food because we live in a digital economy. I need real food if I want to survive.
Gentlemen, the only reason I started with inflation is I want to see where we agree and what our justification is, so we can finally extrapolate our reasons and then see where the divergence is.
So
Robert.
I'll say that I fully agree that inflation is a euphemism, and it's basically comes down to, is your currency being depreciated or is it appreciating over time? I'll say currency specifically because that's what the central bank is ultimately printing. They're not printing the underlying, which is gold.
Robert, what is fiat, and what is the primary issue with fiat money?
Yeah, so fiat currency is basically the culmination of fractional reserve banking. It's zero reserve banking, right? It's paper currency with no underlying. It is not redeemable or convertible into specie of any kind, whether that be gold, silver, or any other monetary metal. The problem with that is you have now divorced government from natural law, basically. If citizens cannot redeem their currency for some form of monetary metal that cannot be counterfeited, like gold, then the government can counterfeit the currency ad infinitum, and people are incapable of casting a vote of no confidence by redeeming that currency, specifically a vote of no confidence in the irresponsibility of their monetary policy by redeeming that currency for specie, and taking it a step further, exporting your specie to another country, to another jurisdiction that has perhaps a more responsible monetary policy. So the fact that we have the entire set of 200 some odd nation states on a fiat currency standard today, and we've been on it for over 50 years, I think is a very dark realization in understanding the historical progress of mankind. And I think when you look at the data, it really bears it out that fiat currency has been almost universally destructive, right? We've seen debts at all-time highs, private and public. I won't even go into the gamut of data. I'll just point people to the website. WTF happened in 19.com. It's economic, it's social, it's even physiological. Addiction rates are up, suicide rates are up. Everything's coming off the rails since we've engaged in this endless currency counterfeiting experiment called global fiat.
Mr. Schiff, what is fiat money? What is the primary issue with fiat?
Okay, so first of all, we should talk about what currency is before we talk about fiat, because currency was really invented as a money substitute. So money would be a commodity, an actual commodity that has value, that people need and people use, but that is a commodity that the market has decided to use as money because it's the most liquid of all the commodities. Money was an invention that allowed man to move beyond barter. Right? Before money, people traded goods, but it was cumbersome because you needed a coincidence of needs. If I was a baker and I wanted some candlesticks, I needed a candlestick maker that wanted my bread or whatever I baked. So, but man eventually found out that they could have a commodity that could be used in exchange for all other commodities, and gold was basically the commodity that ended up being money. I mean, other commodities have been money and they can be money, but gold just fulfills that role very well for a lot of the properties that Bitcoin copied. Gold has a lot of these properties. So gold is actual money, and what gives gold value is the fact that it's a precious metal that we need because it does a lot of things. And so if I'm a baker and I sell my bread and somebody gives me gold, I've received something of value in exchange for my bread. I've got gold. I've got a commodity. Same thing if you're a worker. If I work all day and my employer pays me gold, I exchange my labor that has value for gold that has value. I don't need to use the gold. I don't have to be a jeweler and make jewelry. I don't have to be, make computers and use gold to conduct electricity. I can then take that gold and give it to the candlestick maker or the butcher. Everybody can circulate it because we know at the end of the day, there's somebody who needs gold. There is a business that's going to need it. Somebody's going to need it. There's a use for it. Even if I'm not going to use it myself, I can give it to somebody else because of that. Now, so money has value because of its properties, its intrinsic value. Currency, the origins of currency was to make money easier to negotiate, easier to deal with. So rather than me having to lug around my gold, we could issue notes that were redeemable in that gold. The gold could sit in a vault with a blacksmith or with a bank, and notes could be issued that were obligations to pay that gold to the bearer of those notes if they demanded it. And so those notes became currency. Currency doesn't have any intrinsic value. It's just a piece of paper with some ink on it. But currency derives its value from the gold that backs it up. And in fact, all the original currencies in the United States, first they were issued by private banks, and then they were issued by the government. But there was always gold that gave them value. Fiat currency is a currency that's not backed by real money. Right? It just is. Right? The government just says this is the money, and it's not backed by anything. Now, the difference between a fiat currency and a legitimate currency is the legitimate currency derives the value from the money that's behind it, and fiat currency derives its value mainly from confidence and faith, because the government has decreed this to be legal tender. The public believes that it's going to hold its value, and it believes that it has value. A lot of that comes from the fact that the government requires the payment of taxes in that fiat currency, and so people do need to accumulate it in order to pay their taxes. But at the end of the day, even if the public loses confidence, if it loses faith in the future value of that currency, it's not even going to matter that it's legal tender. It's not going to matter that it's required for taxes. Its value could just collapse. There could be hyperinflation. So I think the most important significant difference between a fiat and legitimate currency is not necessarily that the government has given it a legal tender status. It's the fact that its value is derived from confidence. People have to believe in it. That they have to believe that people will want it in the future, that it will hold its value into the future, and that's what gives it its value. It's that confidence. It's that faith that it will be accepted in exchange for goods and services by others at some future date.
Mr. Breedlove, what is the important difference between money and currency? And please work in your explanation of why fiat is any more of an issue than people think it is.
Yes. I mean, Peter's pretty well captured it, but I'll try to say it in simple terms. Currency is basically a promise to money, right? To deliver money in the future. It's a debt instrument. It's an IOU. And a legitimate currency would be when that promise is kept. And an illegitimate currency would be when that promise is broken. Simple as that, right? A fractional reserve bank would basically be one that issues more liabilities than it has assets in reserve. So it's running an insolvent business operation, basically a confidence game. So long as not enough people all seek to redeem their currency at once, the fraud can continue. But should they all try to, a sufficient number try to redeem at once, then the bank will collapse. That is a bank run. And fiat currency is basically the culmination of that broken promise, right? It's like a permanently broken promise. It's not redeemable for anything. Its use is really just compelled under the legal threat of force, specifically in the collection of taxes. And so,
yeah, well, fiat currency, it's not just that it's not just a broken promise. They don't even make the promise. There's nobody, the U.S. government doesn't promise to pay anything for.
Yeah, I'm saying 1971 was like the permanent breaking of that promise. So since 1971,
we defaulted. So the
Agreed.
dollar was, the dollar was more of a legitimate currency in that foreigners could redeem their Federal Reserve notes for real money. And so at that point, the dollar was not fiat. But once that promise was broken, once the government reneged, then it became fiat, right?
Yes.
And now it's been circulating for more than 50 years, and nobody thinks there's anything there. It's just that we all just have confidence, or not all of us, because I don't have any, but the world has confidence that the dollar, the Federal Reserve note, which is now called the dollar, that it's always going to have value. People
It's a
just believe
classic
that.
bait and switch. I think we're in full agreement about that.
Good.
Yeah, there's not a promise being made to fiat currency currently, correct? It's a broken promise. Pre-1971, the dollar was gold. Post-1971, it is not. So it's now an illegitimate currency.
Yeah, and
Well,
that's
we
why
could
you
still-
now need almost $2,800 to buy 1 ounce of gold. Back in 1970, you only needed 35.
Exactly.
So, and again, that's not gold.
In Nixon's August of 71 speech, he said we're temporarily detaching the dollar from gold. So
Yes,
it's still a broken promise. Politicians are still liars. Let's
There's
get that on record,
nothing more
please.
permanent than a temporary government solution, as they say.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, but the point I'm making is that gold is the same as it was in 1970. It's just an ounce of gold is an ounce of gold. It's just that the dollar is not the same as it was in 1970. In 1970, or 1980, whatever, 1970 rather, you needed only $35 to buy an ounce of gold, and now you need almost $2,800. So
Mr.
that's So it's the dollar that's changing.
Mr. Breedlove, without getting into an explanation, I just want to look at what criteria we want to look at before we get into the details. What characteristics would money ideally have? And then I'm going to make sure Mr. Schiff agrees with these before we continue. What characteristics would money ideally have?
I can give you a very short 5-word answer for me. There's a lot to unpack in each of these words, but money needs to be divisible, durable, recognizable, portable, and scarce.
Mr. Schiff, divisible. I'm sorry, I couldn't write those down fast enough. Divisible, durable, portable, scarce. What was
recognizable?
The middle? Recognizable. Is there anything Mr. Breedlove is missing in that you'd like to add as far as what characteristics would money ideally have?
Yeah, I mean, those are ideal characteristics that, that if money can fulfill those functions, it makes it a lot better. But I think the other important characteristics that you have to also have is you need to be a store of value. It needs to be a unit of account. And to an extent, a medium of deferred payment, which is also similar to a store of value, meaning I can borrow money and repay it, or loan money and get repaid, and have confidence that I'm going to be repaid in money of the same value that I loaned out. And so, in order for money to be a store of value, it has to have a value that is being stored.
Got it.
And so, for something like gold, what value does gold have? Well, gold is a precious metal.
I promise we'll get into that. I promise we'll get into that.
Okay.
We're going to go one by one. This is why. All right. We agreed on Mr. Schiff. Do you have any problem?
It needs to be a medium of exchange. But yes, that would be the last one. Medium of exchange.
Medium of exchange.
My only comment on that I fully agree. I would just call those the functions of money versus the properties of money. That's my only
functions versus properties.
Okay,
let's go one by one. I want a currency that is easily divisible. Mr. Schiff, please take 2 minutes why I should want gold as my money if I want currency that is divisible, money that is divisible.
Well, gold is extremely divisible because you can melt it down and you can recast it in bars or coins of various sizes, and you can weigh it and you can know exactly what you have. And thanks to the internet, you can have gold stored, and the custodian can issue ownership of that gold digitally, so that gold can actually be broken down digitally into grams or fractions of a gram, which is part of what's happening now with the digital economy. in the past, when gold worked very well as money, I thought it was interesting that, Robert said that gold hasn't worked as money. Well, I mean, it's worked fantastic for thousands of years. That's why it became money. It didn't become money because it didn't work. It became money because it worked really well. But in the past, before we had the technology we had today, even though you could divide gold into very small quantities, people didn't do that because you could lose it. It just wasn't, it didn't make sense to use gold to buy, let's say a cup of coffee, because the amount of gold that you would need to exchange was too small. And so they used other metals that also have monetary properties. So we used silver as money. We used copper as money. We used, nickel as money. But today, given the technology that we have, it's very possible to break gold down into tiny units and then transact electronically. So it's kind of like, it's better than the goldsmith did with paper money, where he held the gold and he gave you a note that would circulate. You could leave your gold on deposit with a custodian and you can exchange ownership electronically. You don't even need blockchain to do that. I mean, you could tokenize the gold and put it on a blockchain if you wanted to, but you don't even need a blockchain because, the custodian can do it without that at an even lower cost. So it makes it very inexpensive. If I wanted to buy a cup of coffee and pay for it with gold, if the merchant wanted my gold, I could do that transaction very quickly and very inexpensively, much faster and much cheaper than if I was going to pay in Bitcoin and the merchant wanted to accept Bitcoin.
Mr. Breedlove, I want a money that is easily divisible. Why should I support Bitcoin?
Okay, I'll keep it brief again. Each Bitcoin is divisible into 100 million subunits, often called Satoshis or sats. Bitcoin can also do what's called if that were ever not economically viable, right? Let's say we get to a point where the purchasing power of Bitcoin is so high that a cup of coffee costs half a sat or some fraction thereof. Bitcoin can do what's basically a backwards compatible software update called a soft fork and increase that divisibility further. So you could have, microsats, millisats, whatever you want to call them. So essentially, Bitcoin is infinitely divisible.
All right, Mr. Breedlove, I want a currency, a money that is durable. Why should I support Bitcoin?
I think I need to say a couple of things about this Bitcoin versus gold thing before we continue, because ultimately, I own both, right? I don't know if Mr. Schiff does or not. I know he owns gold. I don't know if he owns Bitcoin. For me, it's like, okay, they're both sound money, in my opinion. Gold is sound money for a non-digital future. Bitcoin is sound money for a digital future. So for me, it's not an either or. It's weighting those two probabilities and allocating the cash balances in my portfolio accordingly. So gold has this 5,000 year head start as the asset that allows people to store purchasing power across time without the need to trust one another. That's the beauty of gold. As Nick Szabo would say, it's the trust minimized asset. That is the store value function that we talked about earlier. That's rooted in the monetary properties of monetary metals in general, but because gold has superior relative scarcity to all other monetary metals, it's the best store of value or means of preserving purchasing power into the future. That's great. Gold's awesome. 5,000 years. I like to own it. Should we degenerate into a future that is a little more dystopian with no electricity, internet, or AI, then yeah, I want to have some gold for sure. Bitcoin, on the other hand, is this 15-year-old digital disruptor to gold. And I think to the extent that we look at the future as one in which that is characterized by electricity, internet, artificial intelligence, is the same extent to which I would think Bitcoin would be a dominant money. And you might ask why. And my view is that Bitcoin is the only money that can be transacted across the internet and telecommunications networks without dependency on the promises of others.
All right.
And we're back to that word promises, right? Which was the operative word between currency and money. And so now this is also true for gold. If we are going into that future that's no electricity, internet, no AI, then you do need gold to transact trustlessly between people in physical space.
That's a
so that would be my view, just to finish the point, is that weight your probabilities. Like, do you think we're going into this world or that world? And then just weight your cash balances accordingly.
That is a straw man, and it's not an argument that I'm making. So I'm going to address it. But first, I want to make a point on divisibility.
I'm not making the argument that you're making the argument. I'm just stating my views.
No. Yeah. All right. But
about
you're also
Bitcoin
stating
versus
my
gold.
views. Okay. But you're also stating my views. So on divisibility, yes. I mean, Bitcoin is extremely divisible. I mean, that's the benefit of dividing nothing. You know, when you're dividing nothing, it's very easy to divide it. I mean, gold is something, so it's a little bit harder, but it's not, you know, it's still very divisible. But I don't think Bitcoin is sound money for any future, whether you say it's a electronic or a dystopian or whatever, however the future is. I think gold works in any environment. I think gold works better in a digital future because the internet, electronics improves gold's properties with respect to the characteristics of money. So gold will work better in a digital future than it worked in an analog past. I mean, it is very compatible with that. You're making an argument just because we have a digital economy that we don't need real money anymore. We can have fake digital money. And, you know, there's nothing unique about Bitcoin. You say Bitcoin is the only thing. There's tens of thousands of other tokens that I could create, that have been created, that will be created. There is nothing special about Bitcoin that anybody else can't copy or replicate. All that it has is that it has more people who believe in it right now. You have more, I guess, computer capacity behind it, but that could change. I mean, the odds that anyone's even going to care about Bitcoin in 10 years, I think are pretty low. Yeah, you know, it's been around for 10, 13 years. It's been a big bubble and people have gotten rich buying and selling it, right? The people who got rich bought it a long time ago, and they're rich because they're selling it out to people who bought in later. But the people who are buying in now think they're going to get rich, but they're not. They're just the exit strategy for the people who got in years ago and who are cashing out. So that to have all this, you know, put all this faith and confidence in this one digital token and ascribe to it all sorts of properties that it does not have, or say it's in any way unique, when it's not. You know, really all it is it's, you know, it's old. It's a pyramid, right? It's just dressed up in the trappings of the digital age, but it's no different than chain letters. I mean, I call it a blockchain letter, you know, because it's actually a chain letter on a blockchain. So it doesn't possess these characteristics that you're ascribing to it.
We will get into that in the scarcity section. Mr. Breedlove, I want a currency that is recognizable. Why should I like Bitcoin?
Yeah, I didn't answer your question about durability. Just to state that really quickly, Bitcoin is essentially distributed information. The analogy I like to use here is something like the Bible. You know, you can go and destroy as many physical Bibles as you please, but the Bible as an idea is not going anywhere, right? It's a component of distributed information that's so permeated global consciousness that it's not going anywhere, basically. So Bitcoin is similarly stored everywhere, right? It's stored everywhere, nowhere. Every node has a full copy of the Bitcoin transaction history, which is the Bitcoin time chain. And so this makes it very robust to physical degradation over time. So that's durability. And then you were asking about recognizability. Was that the question?
Recognizability. If I want a currency that's recognizable, how do I know I'm not getting fake Satoshis? How do I know it's not Bitcoin Cash or anything else? Yes, please address recognizability.
One last thing on durability. Obviously, gold's very durable as well. So I'm not bashing gold. Gold's great at durability. In terms of recognizability, this is the ability of a user to authenticate the veracity of the money, to authenticate what it is, right? It is what we say it is, right? It's not lead painted in gold. This is actual gold, which is, well, this particular property of money, recognizability, is where we get the term sound money, actually. You can drop a gold coin from a certain height and it makes a certain sound, and that's a heuristic for determining whether or not that coin is authentic. Obviously, that's just one simple way to do it. There's obviously techniques to assay the veracity of gold as well. This is also where coinage was introduced as like a central certification of that weight of gold. So all of these things serve the recognizability property of money. And in terms of Bitcoin, I think it basically perfects the property of recognizability. You can audit the entire supply history and transaction history for yourself. So you can verify that the money supply is what it is represented to be. You can also verify the entire history of transactions. So this is the ethos that's often cited in Bitcoin of don't trust, verify. Bitcoin is a system that's built 100% on verification, 0% on promises or trust. And that makes it a superior money. Now, specifically, how do you recognize that when you receive Bitcoin, it is authentically Bitcoin? You run a node. So you run software that does the processes I just described to confirm that you are receiving actual Bitcoin and that it's confirmed in the Bitcoin time chain.
Mr. Schiff, what are the shortcomings with regard to Bitcoin when it comes to recognizability?
Well, I don't know if there's any shortcomings from recognizability. I mean, I concede that Bitcoin and the creators did a very good job of mimicking the characteristics that gold has with respect to its function as money. Bitcoin's done a very good job of that. I mean, and so have a lot of other cryptos. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them that can do exactly what you can do with Bitcoin. Bitcoin isn't unique in the respect that it could do that. There's an infinite supply of tokens that can be created that can do exactly what you do with Bitcoin. The main problem that I have with Bitcoin is none of those characteristics are relevant if you don't start off with an actual commodity, with an actual store of value. It doesn't matter. None of the other things make a difference. The one property that Bitcoin did not copy from gold is that gold's a metal. I mean, I have some gold jewelry on. I mean, gold has a lot of applications, but I've got a watch, I've got a ring, I've got this bracelet that's made of gold. I mean, people have been adorning themselves with gold jewelry for thousands and thousands of years. I don't think that's going to stop. I mean, there's a reason that people wear gold. I mean, I'm not wearing tin, I'm not wearing lead. There's a specific reason that it's that particular metal that is used so much in jewelry and not other metals. But gold has a lot of other applications, especially in the digital age. There's a lot more uses for gold today than there were 1,000 years ago. And we're going to continue to invent new uses for gold as we evolve, because gold has very unique characteristics that you can't find in other metals that are needed. And of course, it's very scarce. So, the price is going to be high for that reason. But Bitcoin didn't substitute that. There's nothing you could do with the Bitcoin. At the end of the day, there's no real demand for Bitcoin. As I started at the beginning, even though I may not be a jeweler, there is a jeweler that's going to need my gold at some point in the future. I don't have to use it, but I can store it so that somebody else could use it in the future. Well, when you have Bitcoin, you can't do anything with it now, and nobody will be able to do anything with it in the future. The only thing I could do with my Bitcoin is give it to somebody else. And that's the only thing they can do with it. You pass it around like a hot potato. There is no underlying use for Bitcoin because it's just a string of numbers, just an electronic string of numbers that are been tokenized. But that's it. I mean, people collect them. It's like people have Bitcoin collections, and they hope they're going to make money as collectors. They hope somebody's going to buy their collection for a higher price than they paid. But that's not money.
Mr. Schiff, if I want a money that is portable, why should I like gold as opposed to Bitcoin? Portability.
Well, first of all, Bitcoin is money. I mean, gold is money and Bitcoin's not. So, you've already sacrificed money. So you can either have real money that's portable or you can have Bitcoin that's also portable. But the reason that you should have real money that's portable is gold is very portable. I mean, you put an ounce of gold in your pocket, that's almost $3,000 at today's price. And it's small, right? So most people, they can have all their wealth in gold and carry it around in their pockets. It's only when you're like a billionaire and you're talking about having all your money in gold that you're talking about needing, suitcases for your gold as opposed to just your pockets. But for most people, gold is very portable because you concentrate a lot of value in a very small place. But you can easily, I mean, it's hard to store, $100 million worth of cattle or oil or sugar. But $100 million worth of gold actually doesn't take up that much space. So it's still very good. Yes, Bitcoin is more portable because, again, you're porting nothing. If I have nothing, yes, I can. It's very easy to transport nothing. It doesn't have any weight, doesn't have any physical dimensions, doesn't have anything. Although what I can do with gold that also makes it portable is I can have my gold in a vault somewhere where I can assign my ownership to somebody else. And so the gold doesn't even have to move. All that you have to port is who owns it, right? And so you could do that with gold. So from that respect too, gold is extremely portable so long as you have a secure place to store it. Yes, you don't need that with Bitcoin. I get it. It's decentralized. It can self-storage, but that's because you're storing nothing. There is no cost to store nothing because there's nothing there.
Mr. Breedlove, I want a money that is portable. Why should I like Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think this is a good place to understand why I consider gold to not be a functional form of money for scaling transactions globally in the digital age. And that's ultimately because gold is a physical metal, right? To settle with finality or to transact with finality in gold is to move the physical metal from one set of hands into another set of hands. That is a bit difficult to do if you're trading across geographic boundaries, especially if you're doing it with a lot of frequency. So what am I saying? I'm saying that telecommunications, modern telecommunications, are basically faster than our money when we use gold, right? So we have to use promises to gold to scale gold as a monetary system. We're back to the world of currency. And this also necessitates the centralization of gold's custody, right? We need to put all the gold into one or a few places. And now look, it can be done in a free market fashion, and it has been done in a free market fashion. But more often than not, governments in times of crisis will intervene and centralize the custody of that gold, or they'll suspend convertibility, which is, as we said earlier, breaking that promise, turning a legitimate currency into an illegitimate currency. And this necessity of trusting that promises won't be broken, in my opinion, is why gold does not scale as money in the digital age. And I think this is also a good framing for Bitcoin. You know, Mr. Schiff is saying that Bitcoin is nothing. Like, well, we know it's not nothing. Obviously, it has purchasing power. I think his argument would be that, oh, well, it has purchasing power because of the greater fool theory.
Well, I'd say it.
But my argument would be that it has purchasing power because it has unforgeable costliness built into it.
It doesn't really have purchasing power.
This is a term used by Nick Szabo, and he basically said that money needed to represent an expenditure of energy such that it could tokenize human labor energy, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do with this concept of money in the first place. So Bitcoin has unforgeable costliness in digital form, just like gold has unforgeable costliness in physical form.
Yeah, but
so when it's in digital form, it can move across telecommunication networks with maximal ease, because the speed of light is nature's speed limit, and it cannot be broken. So I would say Bitcoin perfects portability in a way that the promise is necessary to make gold portable are its Achilles heel and its ultimate undoing, which we've seen time and time across history. I could cite multiple examples of this, right? The United Kingdom in 1797, they suspended redeemability. United States in 1861 suspended redeemability. Germany, 1914, suspended redeemability. The list goes on, right? These promises have been broken time and time again. We've shown that the application of currency on gold works until someone decides to not keep their promise, which tends to be in times of crisis or war.
There is something called free market capitalism. Companies compete for their reputation, their brand. You know, Brinks, for example, has been in business for, I don't know, 150 years. Nobody has lost an ounce of gold in trusting it to their custody. And you know, so you know, you can have companies in a free market that will store your gold, and they also provide insurance. You know, they're insurance companies that will insure gold in case something happens to it while it's being stored. But your point that you need energy to create Bitcoin, I don't concede that we don't waste a tremendous amount of energy making nothing. We do. In order to mine a Bitcoin and, not really mine, solve a mathematical equation that they like to call mining as part of the counterfeit of nature of what you're doing to make it sound like it's gold. But when you solve a problem to generate a Bitcoin, you expend a lot of energy. But that energy is not then stored in the Bitcoin where you can release it at some future point. The energy is gone. It's a waste. Whereas when you expend energy, human labor and other resources to mine an ounce of gold and dig it out of the ground, at the end of the day, you have an ounce of gold that could be used in all sorts of things. It's an important, valuable metal that we need for consumer electronics, aerospace, dentistry, jewelry. So you've actually got something to show for the resources that were consumed in its creation. But with Bitcoin, you have absolutely nothing to show for it. You've wasted all those resources making nothing that has any real value. So you can't say, oh, just because we use energy and labor that the Bitcoin has value. It's like if I paid 500 people to dig a giant hole in the ground, and then I paid another 500 people to fill it back in with dirt. You can't say, well, I've got this valuable, earth that because we spent all this money digging holes and refilling them. I've got nothing. I wasted all that labor. I'm exactly where I started. It was a waste. And so I think we're wasting money solving math problems to create nothing so people can gamble on it.
Mr. Breedlove.
And it's all a zero-sum game. If somebody makes money off of Bitcoin, somebody lost it. And it doesn't have purchasing power. It has a price. You can sell your Bitcoin and get money from some fool who buys it, and then you can take that and buy something if you want. Sure.
We will get into that.
I'll respond to this because we're now invoking
one final response, and then we'll move on to the next section. Yes.
Okay, so yeah, we were invoking, Peter there was invoking at the end Marx's labor theory of value, right? You can't just pay someone to dig a hole and fill it back in and that be productive, right? Again, ultimately value is subjective. It is a function of what people want. So I'm not advocating and saying that it's the expenditure of energy that gives Bitcoin value, but I am saying that the expenditure of energy in Bitcoin mining is what protects it from counterfeiting. And this is indeed the only way we know in this thermodynamic universe to protect any money from counterfeiting. This is the same process that gold uses, right? It's proof of work. You have to expend energy to acquire the commodity. So when you expend the energy in Bitcoin mining, you're acquiring basically a guaranteed fraction of the total supply because you know the denominator is always 21 million. So if you mine one Bitcoin, you've got a 1 out of a possible 21 million forever. It's the same thing you're doing with gold, albeit with a less certain denominator, right? You've mined 1 ounce of gold out of a total supply of X. We don't really know what the total supply of gold will ever be into the future. So I would like to ask why the energy expenditure of gold mining is not considered wasteful, whereas the energy expenditure of Bitcoin mining is considered wasteful. I mean, this is just a function of consumer preference, in my view, ultimately. So anyone that's saying something is wasteful is just saying they don't value it, which that's fine. You can express that thesis in the marketplace by not owning it.
No, but
you asked me to focus on portability. I just want to say one last thing about Bitcoin's portability. Because it's this non-physical bearer asset, right? To hold Bitcoin is to hold the private key to Bitcoin. Not only can you move it at the speed of light around the planet, but you can also store it in any information-bearing medium. Your mind, a sheet of paper, a computer, hard drive, anything that can bear information. Also, because it's informational, you can put it in what's called a multi-key custody schema. So you can slice that private key into multiple pieces and put it in a 2 of 3 or a 3 of 5 wallet. And this is basically essentially the same protocol we use to secure nuclear launch codes. So I think that's pretty damn secure in terms of custody. So portability is not just moving it across space, it's also how you custody it. And the more non-physical it is, which Bitcoin is non-physical, enables you to custody it in ways that are more secure from confiscation, theft, etc.
Mr. Schiff, we will get to energy expenditure. Can you explain, if I want a money that is scarce, why I should value gold as opposed to Bitcoin?
Well, first of all, I don't think Bitcoin is money because I don't think it qualifies as money, and it's not really used as money. It's used to speculate with. People buy it because they think the price is going to go up and they're going to get rich. People don't own money to get rich. They earn money from their work, their labor, and they save money, but it's not a lottery ticket to get rich. But which was the characteristic? Was it portability? You said
scarcity.
Scarcity. Yeah, I mean, gold is very scarce in nature. Gold is not made by man. Gold was created during the Big Bang, and so the gold that's here is the gold that's here. And you could look at historically, the supply of gold grows quite slowly over time, maybe 1 or 2% per year, which is similar to the growth of the population of the world. So gold is scarce, and that's one of the reasons that it's expensive is because it's scarce. But it's also scarce and valuable. See, scarcity in and of itself doesn't make something very valuable. There has to be a lot of demand. And so the reason that gold is expensive is not just because it's scarce, but because it's scarce and it has properties that are extremely valuable and desirable and that are not easily replicated, with other commodities. And so a lot of people want gold, but they can't have it because there's not that much of it. And so the price is high. And so it's one of the reasons that it works well as money, because you can have a lot of value concentrated in a very, small quantity. You don't really have to worry about all of a sudden some huge inflation coming. You're not going to have a massive discovery of gold that's going to be so enormous that you're going to diminish the value of the gold that already exists.
Mr. Breedlove, I want a currency that is scarce and valuable. Why should I appreciate Bitcoin?
Yeah, again, so value is just, it's going to be whatever people prefer, right? Whatever people are expressing through action that they want ultimately. So you can't try to say something is valuable. This is my whole hang up with intrinsic value. The value does not inhere in anything. It has to do with how we respond to conditions in the environment, basically. So what are we trying to say here? That basically it's, the word speculative keeps getting used. All human action is speculative, right? We never know if our actions are going to create the outcomes that we desire. But it appears to me that in the game of money, the idea is to hold the money that is the most scarce. And scarcity and rarity are not the same things, right? Rarity, right? The one, I can do the Robert Breedlove original painting. That's a very rare painting, but it just so happens I don't have any artistic skills that are marketable, so there's no market demand for that thing. It means it's not scarce, right? Scarcity exists wherever demand exceeds supply. So even if you've got a supply of one, if there's no demand, there's no scarcity. So money is interesting though, because money lays claim to anything that the market can generate, right? It's the means by which we acquire anything that the market can offer. So basically the money that has the most inflexible supply tends to be the money that best stores purchasing power across time. This is why gold outcompeted all the other monetary metals, because it had the least flexible supply. And this is why I think Bitcoin basically perfects the scarcity of money insofar as it has an absolutely inflexible supply curve. It's the only fixed supply asset human beings have ever created, even for gold, right? If we could flip a switch and make everyone in the world go out and start mining gold today, we could increase the supply much more quickly than the 2% a year that we've done historically. That's not true for Bitcoin. No matter how hard we try to produce Bitcoin, the supply does not change.
Are you saying
that's a step change in money that we've never seen before?
But Robert, you're telling me that none of the other 20,000 Bitcoins have a fixed supply, that Bitcoin is the only currency that has a fixed supply. There are no other cryptos that do that.
That's correct. It's the only one that's credibly decentralized.
No.
And therefore not dependent on the promises of developers or anyone else. So anyone else is launching a crypto that says it has a fixed supply, you're trusting that guy. You're not trusting any guy.
Well, what about like the forks? What about Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin Gold? Don't they have the same 21 million cap?
Yeah, here's what happens with a fork. And this is probably one of the more complex areas to understand about Bitcoin, is that it's not just a protocol layer. There's also a social layer, right? Same is true for gold or any monetary asset. If there's a fork at the protocol layer and we split into, say, Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, right? Bitcoin Cash wants to increase block size ostensibly to improve transaction throughput, although I think it was to compromise decentralization. If you wanted a take on that, you could read the block size wars of 2017. When the protocol layer splits, the social layer follows. Everyone that owned Bitcoin gets allocated one Bitcoin Cash. Then they choose to express their own thesis of which protocol they want to follow by buying and selling in the marketplace. And it just
so happens, both have a fixed supply. That's my only point.
But they don't have a fixed supply because people sell their Bitcoin Cash. Its market cap collapses. It's more vulnerable to a 51% attack. It's still based on the promises of the people that hold it close. It's not decentralized. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't have the credible.
So you're saying Bitcoin
assurance.
Cash isn't decentralized? Just
no,
Bitcoin?
It is not. There is no decentralized crypto asset other than Bitcoin. It's Bitcoin, not shitcoin.
Yeah, well, I think there are others. I don't think it's the only one. And couldn't somebody, even if there were no other ones, couldn't somebody create another one today? Couldn't somebody launch a crypto that had the same properties as Bitcoin?
Yeah. You can fork the rules of chess, but good luck getting anyone to play with you. Like that's the analogy, basically.
Look, you talk about that there's no such thing as intrinsic value. So gold doesn't have any value. It only has the value that we want to ascribe to it. So let's say that that's the case, right? Because people value jewelry, because people value electronics, because they value all kinds of things, then they need gold, right? Because they want all these things that they need gold for. But for Bitcoin, they don't need it for anything. I agree that people want it because they think they're going to get rich if they own it. Just because you're going to say, okay, Bitcoin's value comes from the fact that people want it. That's true. People want it today. You have no idea whether people will want it in 5 years, in 10 years, let alone 100 years.
That's true for everything.
The people have wanted gold, let's say, for 5,000 years. The odds that they're not going to want it anymore, that all of the characteristics that throughout all of human history, really, we've valued about gold, that we're just going to stop. We're not going to want it at all, versus saying that something that's only been around for 13 years, that can easily be replicated and doesn't have any real value unto itself, that for some reason, people are always going to want Bitcoin, as opposed to something else that could come around that might be better than Bitcoin, that might be faster, that might be cheaper, that might be more secure. Who the hell knows, right? But to put your faith in it and say this is it, right? No one's ever going to stop wanting this. No, nothing's ever going to be better than this. Is a stretch, to say the least.
Yeah, I heard you.
I want to stick to this scarcity because this appears scarcity and value. So, Mr. Schiff, I just want to clarify. You're saying it's not that gold has intrinsic value. It's that the historical record and the actual properties that gold has makes it more likely to be money by a very high degree than something like Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is much more likely to be replicated and much less likely to be valued in the future in comparison to gold.
I think gold does have intrinsic value. I'm just saying, if you don't believe in that concept, if you think all the value is subjective and gold is really only has the value because human beings decide that it has value, I said if you're going to take that perspective, and look at it that way, I'm willing to do that. And then you're going to say, yes, Bitcoin has value because some people, not me, right? But some people have decided that they want it. And so because there's a group of people who want it, and the supply is limited of that particular token, the price is what it is. $70,000 is what you'd have to pay to acquire a single Bitcoin at the moment, because people want them. But I think the main driver is speculation. In fact, the main buying right now for Bitcoin is coming from ETFs, people who couldn't care less about all the properties that you're talking about, because they don't even own the Bitcoin. They own an exchange-traded fund that supposedly has the Bitcoin, and they're buying it because they think the price of this ETF is going to go up. It's got nothing to do with Bitcoin as money, has nothing to do with anything. It's just that people are buying that particular speculative asset in their brokerage accounts instead of some other speculative asset, because for the moment, they think there's upside. I think right now, the upside is that, Trump is going to win, and Trump is going to use taxpayer money to buy Bitcoin. As a payback for the Bitcoin community for supporting his campaign. He's going to then create inflation and use the money to buy up Bitcoin, and that's going to push up the price. And so people want to get ahead of that so they can sell to the U.S. taxpayer who's buying at gunpoint from his government.
Okay, Mr. Breedlove, please address the point that in 100 years, we have very good reason to believe that gold will be scarce and valuable, whereas we have no reason to believe Bitcoin not only either won't be there might be a replication of it, making it not valuable and scarce. Please address that point. And Bitcoin could be replicated along with the concept of intrinsic value.
Okay, so let's try to hopefully put a button in this intrinsic value thing once and for all. I get annoyed hearing this term thrown around all the time. Once again, value is subjective, right? If I'm going to quote the great Mises, he said, value is not intrinsic, it is not in things, it is within us. It is in the way in which man reacts to the conditions of his environment. So I think what most people mean when they say intrinsic value is industrial use value versus monetary exchange value, right? These are the two poles we're going to look at for each asset. And indeed, each asset exhibits some degree of moneyness, right? If you hold it with the intention of trading it in the future rather than consuming it or using it in an investment process, then you're treating that asset as money, whether it's water, jewels, whatever it is. And so the asset that is most widely held with that intention is money by definition. So if I look at gold, gold's market cap is around $15.7 trillion today. Roughly 10% of gold's market cap is attributable to demand for gold as an industrial use metal. Dentistry, computers, all the things we use gold, all the industrial processes we use gold in. Roughly 1.6 trillion of gold's 15.7 trillion market cap are demand for gold as an industrial use asset. The other 90% of gold's market cap is attributable to demand for gold as a monetary asset, right? This is people basically holding it with the intention of using it to preserve purchasing power over time, which is to say, spend it in the future on something else at some point. Okay, so that's gold. Gold's got some industrial use demand, and it has some monetary use demand, roughly 90-10 split. Bitcoin has a market cap of around $1.4 trillion today, and 100% of Bitcoin's market cap is attributable to demand for Bitcoin as a monetary asset, because Bitcoin doesn't have any industrial use value. That does not mean Bitcoin doesn't have intrinsic value. Nothing has intrinsic value. Value is subjective, right? As we've quoted Mises earlier. Value does not inhere in things. It inheres within us and how we respond to the conditions of our environment. So Bitcoin has 0% industrial use value, but this is a feature, not a bug. This makes Bitcoin the world's only pure money, the only asset that is 100% monetary use value, or 100% monetary premium, if you want to use that term. And so this argument that's often wielded like a cudgel against Bitcoin, properly understood through the lens of economics, is actually one of its highest compliments. It's like, no, this is the first pure money. We've had approximations of money up until this point, even the great gold, right, which is 90% monetary premium and 10% industrial use value. Even that's not a pure money. It's an impure money. So I think Bitcoin is basically the invention of a digitally pure money. It does not replace gold, as I've said earlier, right? Gold still has its place in physical reality. You know, if we get into that world of no electricity, internet, bullets, well, you're going to need a lot of physical gold. But in a world that has a functional digital ecosystem, I think Bitcoin is the dominant money because it is pure money.
Mr. Schiff, please address strictly.
I'm just going to address the points that he just made. Then you can ask me what you're going to ask me. But look, Bitcoin isn't pure anything, and it's not the only anything. But to correct what the flaw in your argument, so 100% of gold's use is its industrial value. Now, the people who are storing gold today are not using the gold for those reasons, but they're storing it so that somebody else can use it for those reasons in the future. Maybe it's 1,000 years in the future, right? But if it wasn't for gold's use as a metal, as a precious metal, and all of the things that we need gold to do, nobody would want it. The reason it's a store of value is because in 1,000 years, somebody can take that gold and actually do something valuable with it, right? And so all of the demand for gold rests on its industrial uses. None of Bitcoin's value rests on that because it doesn't have any. And you're saying that 100% of Bitcoin's use is for money. I would say that that's a negligible percentage. The number one use case for Bitcoin is speculation. People are buying Bitcoin because they believe it will be $1 million of Bitcoin, $10 million of Bitcoin. They believe that they're going to be broke if they don't have Bitcoin, right? That everybody is going to be, broke except the people who have Bitcoin, because all the world's purchasing power is somehow going to shift to the Bitcoin holders at the expense of everybody who's too dumb like me to buy it. So people are just hoarding their Bitcoin. That's why they want it. They don't want to use it as a medium of exchange, as a unit of account. Nothing's priced in Bitcoin. People aren't really using Bitcoin. Yeah, there's a tiny fraction of people who actually might send some Bitcoin to somebody else to pay for something. But all the transactions with Bitcoin is speculators buying and selling it, day trading it, right? That's what people do with it. They trade it. So it's not being used at all for its monetary purposes. It's almost maybe 1%, 2% is being used potentially for that. And almost all of it is used by speculators who are either hoarding it or trading it.
So if I understand you correctly, the future of gold is to be consumed then? I mean, I would assume that's
All the
basically okay. Well, that's obviously a speculation by you. We don't know what people are going to do with gold in the future.
Well, we know what they've done with it in the past. They've used it.
My question would be this.
When you use gold, it doesn't go away, though, right? That's the beauty of gold. Even if I use the gold, it's still here, right? It can be repurposed. Like all the gold jewelry I showed you can be melted down and used, in a computer, used in a rocket ship. It just because I've worn it as jewelry doesn't change the fact that it's still gold.
So you disagree with the Austrians that money is the asset that is held with the intention of trading in the future. You're saying that that doesn't exist for gold.
No. People are doing that, but the reason that gold can be money is because it is a valuable metal that will have use cases in the future. Otherwise, there'd be no point in holding it.
Okay, and then I'm just gonna let that one go. I'll throw it back to Keith. I do have another point, a rabbit hole I'd like to go down at some point, though.
Mr. Breedlove, when it comes to Peter's previous claim that we have every reason to believe that in 100 years people will value gold for the reasons he previously said, why should we have the same level of confidence in 100 years that people are more likely to value Bitcoin and it will hold its value?
Boy, I really don't like the word should, and I'm not here to be prescriptive to anyone. Again, I think it's just, for me, a matter of saying a future that is digital, that has electricity, internet, and AI. What percentage probability do I assign to that world, to the future of the world going that direction? And what probability do I assign to the future of the world going the direction of no electricity, no internet, no AI? That's how I look at cash balances, because ultimately Bitcoin is the dominant money in that world where you need to move money trustlessly without promises through telecommunication networks like the internet. And gold is the medium for moving purchasing power trustlessly in a physical environment. So that's how I frame it up. I can't tell you why people should believe Bitcoin will be here in 100 years. Gold, I would give gold this one. It's much more likely that gold is here in 100 years than Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's only been around for 15 years. So if the Lindy effect is true, right, and that the life expectancy of a technology is proportional to its lifespan thus far, which is like inverse to what an organism is, right? The older I get, the shorter my life expectancy becomes. But the older an idea gets, the longer its life expectancy becomes. Well, gold's been around for 5,000 years as money. I don't expect it to be gone in 100. Bitcoin's been around for 15. All I can tell you is that when I look at what is money, and I get down to those 5 properties of money that we went through, Bitcoin effectively perfects all of them. And that is very interesting, right? So the rabbit hole I want to jump into at some point is, I heard Peter say on one of the podcasts that, can you think of one example in human history where something that man had made that man did not later make better? That's a rabbit hole I would like to jump into at some point.
Let's go through the 3 characteristics that Mr. Schiff brought up, and then I will ask you if you have any questions for him or statements you'd like him to respond to. I'll do that for each of you. Mr. Schiff, you mentioned money needs to be a store of value. What are the problems with Bitcoin? Why is gold a better store of value?
Yeah, I mentioned that because Bitcoin doesn't have value that can be stored. Gold, when you own gold, you're storing the metal that will not decay over time. It will not tarnish. When they find a shipwreck, some Spanish ship went down 500 years ago, and they've managed to salvage it, and generally all that's left is the gold that they were carrying, and it looks exactly the way it looked the day it sunk. Everything else is destroyed by the sea and the elements, and the gold is as pristine as the day that they made the coins. And so gold's value doesn't go away. Bitcoin doesn't have value. It doesn't start with value, so there's nothing to store. What Bitcoin has is a price, and I would concede that Bitcoin has, for now, a high price. But you can't store a price. A price represents a glimpse of a moment in time based on supply and demand. How much Bitcoin is there that people want to sell, and how much Bitcoin do other people want to buy, and where they intersect at any moment in time is going to give you a price. And so Bitcoin has a price, and the price has gone up a lot since it was first created. But you can't store that. No one knows what the price of Bitcoin is going to be in the future. No one knows if Bitcoin will have a price at all. It may not even be here.
Mr. Breedlove.
Yeah.
Mr. Breedlove, when it comes to store of value, what do people need to know about Bitcoin's store of value benefits?
Yeah, if I can semantically disentangle this thing. Again, if value is subjective, you might be asking yourself, how can you store value at all? And the answer is, well, actually, you can't store value. A value cannot be stored, right? What are you doing? You're basically holding an asset and speculating that other people will value it in the future and will be willing to trade you something for it. So store of value is actually preserving purchasing power across time. And you have to speculate in order to do that because you never know what other people are going to want. This is the nature of markets, right? So when Mises said that all human action is speculation, I think he was pretty right about that. So what we're talking about with money is something that moves purchasing power both across time as a quote unquote store of value and across space as a medium of exchange. And you could take it a step further and say as a unit of account, you're kind of moving it across the minds of people because we need to use it as a language basically to communicate with each other. So gold's great at moving purchasing power across time because it has a very rigid supply, but not so good at moving purchasing power across space, which is why we introduced gold-backed currencies. So we could augment the portability of gold and make it more transactable across space. So in a gold-backed currency, we have a really good solution, actually, right? We can move purchasing power across time because it's pegged to gold and across space because it's in the currency format. However, we've introduced counterparty risk, right? We must trust that the currency issuer will maintain the peg to the gold and not run a fractional reserve or ultimately a zero reserve fiat currency bank. As the world has shown, people tend to violate that trust and give into that temptation. So currency ends up being something that's really good at moving purchasing power across space, but not time. Because what happens with time, the custodians violate the trust that is placed in them, and they start to overissue the currency and ultimately move us into a fiat currency standard. So this is the problem we've been dealing with across all of human history. And I think it's the problem that Bitcoin solves because it's effectively optimized for moving purchasing power across both time and space. Because Bitcoin has a fixed supply, meaning that its purchasing power cannot be debased through supply inflation, and it's a natively digital, non-physical asset, so you can move it at the speed of light and custody it in very highly secure ways that you cannot secure any physical asset.
So your main problem then with gold, because obviously I can store my gold and I can transfer ownership electronically faster and cheaper than you can transfer your Bitcoin. Your main problem is you're saying that you don't trust the custodian, that the custodian is going to loan out or embezzle my gold or they're going to do something. And so gold can't work in the electronic world of the future because you can't trust counterparties, that we're just, we're criminals, and capitalism doesn't really work in that respect because there's no way to know who's honest and who's a crook. And you can't trust counterparties. Let me ask you, Robert, do you have any insurance at all? Like life insurance, fire insurance, health insurance, auto insurance? Do you have any insurance?
I'm not saying that you can never trust counterparties, but I'm saying you should have recourse to an asset that does not require trusting counterparties. That's what holding physical gold is. Let me ask you, Peter, do you hold physical gold?
I have physical gold, yes.
Okay, why don't you just keep it all with a custodian?
Because I want to have some readily available, just in case I need it.
Exactly.
Right. But
thank you.
But you're saying that it doesn't work if it requires trust in a third party. So
I'm saying it doesn't scale. Historically, I think that's been pretty borne out.
It doesn't work on scale. It
doesn't scale. Why did we end up with a fiat
you don't think
currency
insurance
standard?
Companies scale? How many customers do you think big insurance companies have?
No, I'm sorry. I'm talking about
customers,
money.
the better.
I'm not talking about insurance.
You spread the risk. No, but you're saying that gold won't work in the electronic age because it requires a custodian, right? I can transfer my gold to anyone in the world faster and quicker than you can transfer your Bitcoin.
You can transfer a promised gold. You cannot transfer gold faster.
No, I can transfer the ownership of the gold. If I have my gold stored in a vault in Switzerland and it's my gold, and I have a digital claim to that gold that I can transfer to you. And now the ownership goes from me to you. I'm giving you my gold. You're now the owner of that gold. Whether you want to go to the vault and get it is up to you. But you own it. I can transfer the ownership of the gold at lightning speed for nothing to you. If you could be in Australia and I could be here in Puerto Rico, and I can send you your gold and you'll get it faster and cheaper than if I try to send you Bitcoin.
Yeah, as long as you're not in the United States in 1861, Germany in 1914, United Kingdom in 1931, United States in 1933, France and other countries in 1936, or the United States in 1971. Well, those are all the times gold redeemability was suspended.
By governments, not by a private. If I have my gold,
that's what I'm saying. Government is a counterparty risk. Government is a counterparty that violates your rights to your asset.
No. What if the government isn't storing my gold? What if my gold is being stored by a private party in Switzerland or someplace that I trust, and they've never seized the gold?
That's up to you to trust. I just say in Bitcoin, we have don't trust, verify. You have something that you can actually verify and you don't need to trust. And there is value in that for me. And I speculate that there will be value in that for other people. And that speculation has proven to be very on point for the past 8+ years.
You don't trust government. So what if government bans Bitcoin and they makes it a crime for anybody to hold or transact in Bitcoin, and the punishment is maybe 20 years in jail, maybe death? I mean, who knows? They can put the death penalty. Somebody caught with Bitcoin. What do you do then?
Yeah, I think you fight it on the grounds of First Amendment, because
you're talking about a corrupt government. Yeah, but they have no right to seize my gold either. You're talking about a corrupt government that illegally confiscates gold. Well, why can't they ban Bitcoin?
Well, they can ban Bitcoin, but they can't so easily seize it. They can't so easily seize it. So even in 1933, when FDR issued Executive Order 6102, the cost of all the enforcement points of going door to door and taking people's gold tends to be a little bit prohibitive. So that's not what governments do. They go to the custodians.
Right.
So with Bitcoin, you don't need to run that risk, right? You can just have some purchasing power that's not so easily
Bitcoin. Bitcoin is on the blockchain, right? So in 1933, right, when the government told everybody to turn in their gold, they didn't even confiscate it. They didn't send government agents door to door taking people's gold. It was the honor system. It's like they trusted people to take their gold and give it to the government because it was an emergency.
It was coercively threatening people.
Yeah, I mean, there was a law, but they didn't send troops. Nobody got arrested. Nobody went to jail for not turning in their gold. And a lot of people did not turn in their gold because the government has no idea that you have it. And I could take gold and I can give it to somebody. The government has no idea unless they're spying on me, unless they've got cameras and they're looking at me. But they know Bitcoin. If you have Bitcoin and now they make it illegal and they're monitoring the computers, they can find the address. They can see if any Bitcoin. They can find me. I mean, look at how many criminals they've busted and confiscated Bitcoin, right? I mean, Bitcoin is not this secret thing where the government can't figure out who you are. You're leaving a digital footprint every time you transact. If you're saying that we're going to go to a world where everybody's Bitcoin is written on a piece of paper, and the only way I can transfer my Bitcoin to you is to be in the same room with you, where I can hand you that piece of paper in secret, right? Then you've lost all of the advantages that you're talking about. So if you're worried about government, it's far more likely that government could ban Bitcoin than gold.
Yeah, I don't think people will transfer Bitcoin on paper. I think there will be collaborative custody between multiple institutions where private key is segregated into pieces and shared amongst institutions.
No institution.
I mean, you can say that about gold too, Peter. It's like it's all speculation at the end of the day.
But that's what you're arguing against gold. You're saying, well, the government can seize it or confiscate it.
No,
the government can do all sorts of things.
I'm not arguing against gold. I'm just saying it's less concealable and more seizable than Bitcoin. It has its place in a certain view of the future, and I think Bitcoin has its place as well.
Well, we'll see. I don't think Bitcoin has a place. We'll see. I don't think the mania can go on, that much longer. It's already gone on for a long time, but in the scheme of things, it hasn't.
Mr. Schiff, do you have any final points? I know we touched on this earlier. The other criteria you mentioned was unit of account. Is there any shortcoming that you would like to bring to Mr. Breedlove's attention when it comes to money being a unit of account with regard to Bitcoin's utility?
Yeah, so for a unit of account, it would mean that you keep track of prices and everything in money. And you can do that with gold. I mean, it's been done in the past. I mean, you could price products in gold. In fact, when currency was backed by gold, a dollar price was a gold price. In fact, in the United States, in the Coinage Act of 1789, the dollar was defined as a weight of gold. It was a weight of gold or a weight of silver. We had two metals that were legally, constitutionally money in the United States. So the dollar was defined two ways, either as a specific quantity of gold or as a specific quantity of silver. And so all prices were obviously in gold and silver when they were in dollars, because that's what the dollar was. But in order for a money to be a unit of account, right, it has to have a very stable value, over time, and particularly over shorter increments of time too, because you're negotiating. You go to a store and there are prices, right? This is $10, this is $12, this is $20, and the person who puts the price on the product is pretty sure that even if you don't buy that product the day that they put the price on there, that if you buy it a couple of days later, there's still, the dollars that you're going to pay are still worth what they were when they put the price. But Bitcoin can be very volatile. The price of Bitcoin can fluctuate 5 or 10%, sometimes in a day. Generally, it's not that volatile, but you never know. Nobody prices anything in Bitcoin. You don't go to any stores, even if you go to a Bitcoin conference and they're selling merchandise, nothing is like, this is 10 Satoshis, this is, whatever. It's all dollars, right? Nobody prices goods or services in Bitcoin, because you have no idea, what the Bitcoin is going to be at any point in time. It's just too volatile to be used in that, as a unit of account. So it's not. And so that's one of the reasons it's not money. I mean, and in fact, a lot of the Bitcoin community will concede. They say, well, yes, Bitcoin is it's not going to be a currency. It's just going to be like gold, right? We're just going to hold on to it and store it, because you can't really use it for any of those reasons. It doesn't really work as a unit of account, a medium of exchange. So it's going to be digital gold. That's how they've reinvented it, as digital gold. But it's not digital gold either. That's just what they're pretending.
Mr. Breedlove, when it comes to a unit of account and Mr. Schiff's point about the significant volatility that Bitcoin has that gold does not necessarily, what do you have to say in response?
Yeah, let's answer volatility next, but I want to focus on unit of account for this response. So
yes.
Based on my reading of the work of economist William Jevons, he said that gold went through basically 4 evolutionary phases. That initially it was a collectible, then it was used as again, store of value, not a term that I like, but something that's used to move purchasing power across time. Then once enough purchasing power had been stored inside of gold, it started to be used as a medium of exchange. And once its use as a medium of exchange became widespread enough, people started to denominate prices in gold as well, making it a unit of account. So this is the evolutionary path of analog gold. And I think Bitcoin will follow a similar path, right? Initially, it was a joke, collectible. You could go click these Bitcoin faucets online and get free 50 Bitcoin. Eventually, it established a market price pegged to the cost of production initially. It's then since become a very potent store of value or means of moving purchasing power and increasing purchasing power across time. It's the fastest growing asset in human history. And I think as more purchasing power is stored on the Bitcoin network, it is increasingly used as a medium of exchange. The data would bear this out. I want to say, fact check me, but I want to say $4 trillion in transactions have cleared on the Bitcoin network to date. Could be wrong about that. And so as Bitcoin becomes more widespread of a medium of exchange, it will eventually start to be used as a means of pricing, which is a unit of account. So unit of account is basically the function of money that enables price discovery. And price discovery is optimized to the extent that private property is strong, right, and unbreakable. And so Bitcoin is like one of the strongest forms of private property, meaning specifically an asset that is very difficult to separate from its owner and impossible to inflate, I think it actually optimizes price discovery and therefore maximally serves the function or optimally serves the function of a unit of account. You could capture this in Wittgenstein's ruler, right? The importance of the unit of account. He says, if you can't trust the constancy of a ruler that you're using to measure a table, then you can't be sure whether you're measuring the table or the ruler. Right, so we need something that is constant and inflexible in its supply to quote unquote measure. You're not actually measuring, but you're appraising economic value in the marketplace. And gold's been good at that. I think if you denominate things in gold historically, you can strip out the last 10 years of fiat optical illusion bull run by just denominating the S&P returns in gold, for instance. And I think Bitcoin just perfects that by having all things denominated in a fixed supply money, which is fixed at 21 million.
We're going to do two more.
If that's the case, everything is lost like 99% of its value. So it's hard to say that Bitcoin is a good way to measure anything when it's just a massive speculative bubble. I mean, the market's not down 99% because you want to price it arbitrarily in Satoshis,
Well, it is for those that have held savings in Bitcoin. Prices of homes have declined 99% for me in my savings, in terms of my savings.
No, not your savings, but you bought a asset that appreciated faster, right? And so, yes, if you sell your Bitcoin, yes, hats off to you if you got in 10 years ago and you rode it all the way up. I mean, that's great. That's great for you. It's unfortunate for whoever buys the Bitcoin that you sell, right? Your gain is their loss. But yeah, you got in early and made a lot of money, on that. But again, the Bitcoin itself didn't create any value. It's just a transfer. It's a transfer of wealth from the people who get in late to the people who got in earlier. I mean, that's what's going on here.
Mr. Breedlove, when we're talking about a medium of exchange, this is two more criterias, and then each of you will have a question for the other person. When it comes to a medium of exchange, when talking about Bitcoin, are we talking about an investment or a peer-to-peer electronic cash system? Please work that into your explanation of why Bitcoin is a good medium of exchange.
Yeah, so again, I think it's following this evolutionary path. So if you're looking for purchasing power stability in the short run, right, like to buy your groceries month over month at an expected amount of money, then dollars would actually be the best choice, right? If you want purchasing power stability in the short run, but if you're saving in the long run and you want that purchasing power to be available in 10 years, then dollars are the worst choice. Gold would be a better choice. Bitcoin is the best choice, at least over the past 10 years. So a medium of exchange, you tend to want something that's price stable in the short run, right? Purchasing power stable in the short run. I think Bitcoin evolves to become that over time, right? Then again, we're back to the volatility discussion. And volatility is a function of price discovery, which we just talked about. Volatility tends to subside as the market cap of any asset increases. All right, the example I always like to cite here is Amazon. It peaked around $107 in December 1999, and by September 2001, it was $6, right? Amazon had a 94% drawdown in a little over a year. And then from that September 2001 bottom, Amazon's market cap has gone from like $5 billion to $2 trillion today. So it's grown by 39,000 plus %. So Amazon's volatility in that drawdown period was massive, right? It drew down 94%. And as of October 24, Amazon's annualized volatility is around 31. It's like a 31 vol asset now. So because it's much larger, its volatility has gone down. And again, we've seen that pattern persist with the growth of Bitcoin as well. As its market cap has grown, its price volatility against other assets has declined. So I would expect that pattern to continue into the future until Bitcoin reaches a point that it is short-run purchasing power stable enough to be used as a medium of exchange to buy your groceries, your coffee, etc.
Mr. Schiff, please address
what Robert is
medium of exchange and volatility.
Yeah, what Robert is saying about Bitcoin, its price, making it less volatile and de-risking it. Look, I was hearing the same nonsense in 2001. when Bitcoin first got almost to 70,000, and people were saying, oh, it's a lot less risky now at 70,000 than it was at 5,000. It's been de-risked now that it's widely accepted, and it's, it's way up here. It's a lot safer. It's not going to go down. It's not going to be as volatile as it was in the past. And then, within a year, it was back bound below 16,000. I mean, it had a complete collapse. And sure, yeah, then it rallied back up again, but it may not have. It did, but it didn't lose the volatility. And just because Bitcoin is now back above 70,000, getting close to the record high again that we set in March, maybe it'll make a new high, although it's still about 30% below the record high in gold terms. So it has a long way to go to make a new high priced in gold, but it may make a new high price in dollars. But we don't know. It could easily crash again. It can go down to 16,000. It can go to 10,000. It can go lower. It can go a lot lower. Nobody knows. Robert doesn't know. You think it's going to keep going up. You don't know. It might collapse. And so it's hard to say it's any kind of store of value if it could be prone to such a dramatic decline. And even more so. I mean, people got lucky that it came back last time, and it may have keep falling. And of course, a lot of people that bought Bitcoin when it was at 69,000, sold it on the way down. Obviously, people sold it. That's why it went down to 16,000. So a lot of people who are intending on holding it got flushed out because it was so volatile. They got out. They didn't want to take the risk anymore. So they salvaged what they had left. And then, they missed out on this rally. And now, and we'll see. Maybe some more people are FOMOing into it again because they're, oh, no, it's going to go to the moon. Look, it's going to 1 million. It's going to break out. And we'll see. We'll see how long it stays up here. Maybe it'll crash down again. I know that Donald Trump is a big reason for the euphoria. Earlier in the year, it was the ETFs that came about, and that's what drove the speculation. Was the ETF buyers. They need something else to keep the scheme going because I think it's really run out of chain on its own. So they have to come up with new things to create the optimism to get people to stop selling and to sucker more buyers into the market so that the price will go up.
Mr. Breedlove, what is one question you would have for Mr. Schiff or one point of yours that you would like for him to address?
Man, I really wanted to get into this because, Schiff, I heard you say on one of your podcasts, you said, can you think of one example in human history where something that man has made that he did not make better later? And I think you were using that as an example of like, oh, the first airplane was not the best airplane. The first automobile was not the best automobile. The first phone was not the best phone. And you were using that as an argument against Bitcoin, basically. And I actually have a really good answer to that question. I'm supposed to ask you a question now. Then
well, no, you can either make a point and have him respond or ask him a question. So please make this point and Mr. Schiff will respond.
I'll try to deliver my point quickly, and I would love to hear your reply. I think the confusion arises because Bitcoin's not a consumer good. Bitcoin is it's a protocol, right? It's something much more like a language. And I think the one thing that man did create that man has not subsequently make better is the number 0 and the Hindu Arabic numeral system. I wrote about this in a piece called The Number 0 in Bitcoin. We got the Hindu Arabic numerals from 5th century India, the Hindus. It was passed into Europe through the Middle East, so that's why we call it the Hindu Arabic numeral system. And it didn't reach Europe until roughly the 12th century. This was something that was ideologically resisted. Like it contravened what the church was telling people, right? That there was no infinity and no void. Well, 0 represented the void, and it also implied infinity. It was made illegal at one point. Like it was very resisted. Yet, it was basically this unstoppable idea because it served the self-interest of merchants. It let them perform calculation better, faster, cheaper, and with less error. And I go on in the piece to talk about how transformative 0 was. 0 ultimately gave us calculus. Calculus gives us everything in modern science, right? Building bridges.
Yeah, although 0 is more
population
of a
growth. Well, again, yeah, it's an idea. It's an idea, right? But it was an unstoppable idea. And I think that that's basically what Bitcoin is that we have created another unstoppable idea, the idea of a money supply with 0% change, right? A fixed supply money. And
yes,
gold is selected. Sorry, let me finish the point. I'd love for you to respond. Gold selected on the free market because of all the monetary metals, it had the lowest percentage supply change, right? It had the most inflexible supply, which made it the best means of storing purchasing power across time. I view Bitcoin as something that's perfected that property of money by taking it to 0%. The money supply does not change at all with Bitcoin. And so it's just this idea that's really as unstoppable as the number 0 because it's serving the self-interest of individuals ultimately. Everyone would prefer to hold a money that no one else can print and does not depend on preferably one that does not depend on promises of custodians and one that lies beyond the reach of any criminals like governments or anyone else that wants to take your stuff. And I think Bitcoin has just given us a lot of these desirable features in money in a way that nothing else ever has.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it lacks the most important quality that money has to have, why it qualifies it. But what you're describing about what Bitcoin does, if it was impossible to replicate that in another token, right? If what you're saying is, hey, there's some kind of secret patented formula of this blockchain somehow, it is physically impossible to ever create another digital currency that has those properties, even though they're there, and even though, you can improve on it. I mean, part of the problem with scaling Bitcoin is that the more people that use it, the more useless it is to try to use it as a medium of exchange because the network is so slow and the capacity is so limited that it can't affect the type of transactions that other mediums can do. I mean, it can't even come close to what Visa or MasterCard can do as far as processing transactions. And you could use gold as part of that network. So it would just as easy in theory for MasterCard and to process transactions in dollars or euros as it is in gold. But it can't do it in Bitcoin, or Bitcoin can't do that with the blockchain. It's just too slow and too expensive. And as more people try to use it, it actually makes it more expensive and more slow. And I've been hearing all this, Lightning Network stuff for years and years and years. In fact, I remember when Bitcoin first came on the scene, most people's radars in 2017, and a number of companies all of a sudden started to say, oh, we're going to take Bitcoin, and it all kind of went away. Even Elon Musk briefly, a few years later, he started saying, oh, we're going to sell Teslas in Bitcoin, and gave that up because it didn't work. And I think now they may have gotten rid of most of their Bitcoin. I'm not sure how many Bitcoin Tesla has left, but that was part of, we're going to use Bitcoin. And now it's pretty much consigned to, we're going to just buy it in ETFs. And, it's going to be, it's just going to go up in price. We're all going to be buying ETFs. Now I'm forgetting the point that you made.
He says that there's an idea that the human race has not improved on 0.
Yeah. I mean, so I think Bitcoin is not just a concept like mathematics. It is something that was created, a product. It's a token that people buy, and there is a network that surrounds it. And man made that, man designed that, developed that, and I think the idea that this is the best, even if I bought into your concept that nobody's going to do it better, no one's going to do it cheaper, nobody's going to do it faster, that this is it. This is the be all end all in digital tokens. Just because it's first. I mean, I'll grant it that Bitcoin was first, and but it doesn't mean it's going to be the last.
Are you familiar with the concept of a Schelling point in game theory?
I don't think so.
It's just the strategy that if a bunch of people are playing against one another and pursuing their own self-interest, it's the strategy that all these inherently antagonistic actors will adopt when they can't trust one another. I think John Nash, who was very involved in game theory for a long time, he talked about ideal money for decades prior to Bitcoin. That's what I see this as. It's like it's a Schelling point. So when you talk about it being disruptable by a future innovation, I don't see what could be more perfect than a money supply that changes 0%. Like how could it be better? You don't want it to decline. You don't want it to increase. You want it to be fixed. My point is that
somebody else Bitcoin is not the only token where you can fix the supply.
It's the only one that's credibly decentralized in a way that offers really high assurance that money supply will never change. It offers more assurance than any other crypto asset that is all others are centralized to some extent and therefore under the influence of somebody or some entity.
Well, they're not all. There's both. There are some that are, but there are others that are not. Right?
No, even Ethereum. Ethereum is the second largest one. It had a chain roll back in 2016. That proves it's not decentralized. If the second largest crypto asset is not decentralized, then none of the crypto assets are decentralized.
Yes, I agree that Ethereum is different than Bitcoin, right? But Bitcoin is not unique in that there's nothing else that offers that, or there's nothing else that it could offer it in the future. Now, yes, it's the one that people turn to. People have the most confidence and the most trust in it. Yes, I get that. But I just don't know that that's always going to be the case, especially because I think the prices are going to crash. I think the whole thing is a bubble. And so I think the next time the price does crash, maybe it's not going to go up as quickly as it has in all the prior crashes. And I think, it's going to be for most people just a fad. It's going to, there's a core group of people that are very philosophically, aligned and diehard Bitcoiners, Bitcoin maximalists. You seem to be a real true believer in Bitcoin, but there are a lot of people who own it who aren't real true hardcore believers. They're just on board to make some easy money. That's I think the majority of people that have been buying it in the last few years. I mean, I think the people who really believe in it didn't wait to buy it when it was listed as an ETF. They like you, they've held it for years. I think the new buyers that have come in are speculators.
If I may ask one last question, is there any data or threshold or price point or anything that would ever cause you to change your mind about Bitcoin?
I don't know that it's a function of price, because obviously Bitcoin has gone from next to nothing when I first heard about it. I mean, by the time I heard about it, it was definitely, I'm pretty sure it was over $1. I mean, I know it was under $10. I can't say for sure if it was under $1. I forget. It might have been. I can't remember to that exact amount, but it was a lot lower. So it's gone from a very, very low point in relation to where it is now up to 70,000. And my opinion on it hasn't changed at all. I didn't believe when I first heard about it that it could ever get this big, that Wall Street would embrace it the way it did. I mean, so the people who got in on it early and were very involved in promoting it and hyping it up, I mean, they did a great job for that respect of creating demand for what they owned and driving up the price. And selling it. I know a lot of people who are very wealthy today because they got into Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies like Ethereum a long time ago, and they've made hundreds of millions of dollars just by buying and now they're selling. They haven't sold out completely, but they've sold enough to buy big houses and yachts and private jets, and they're all around me. So I see all the money that people have made. But they made that money because other people are convinced that they're going to get rich buying now, and I just don't see that happening.
So outside,
but so I don't think So if Bitcoin were to go to 100,000, 200,000, that's not going to make me change my mind about the ultimate fate of Bitcoin. So it's going to have to be something else. I don't know what that is. I mean, I've said before, if I wake up one morning and we have hit hyper Bitcoin utilization or whatever, where it's a Bitcoin world and the dollar doesn't exist and the euro doesn't exist and all these other currencies, and everything is priced. I go into the supermarket and everything is in sats. If then I guess at that point I'd have to concede, God, I was wrong about this. But I haven't seen Bitcoin use case change at all. Even though the price has gone way up, the use is still speculation. In fact, when I first heard about it, I think it was actually used more. It was used like on the dark web. It was used for illicit, illegal transactions. People used it to buy stuff that they were afraid to use, money or their credit card. So it actually was used more early on than it is now. Now it's almost exclusively used to gamble. Whereas it had a lot more uses, originally. And, that's what initially was the appeal, the Silk Road and these transactions. And then people were trying to conduct business anonymously. They were trying to circumvent AML law and KYC and all this stuff. But now, I mean, that's, I think, a very small fraction. In fact, there are other cryptocurrencies that are much better, right? If you want to use a crypto to buy something that's illegal, there are other coins that are a lot more private than Bitcoin, and that's what and people use.
Mr. Schiff, please ask. Well, we don't have much time, Robert. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say Bitcoin Network has processed $7 trillion of transactions since 2009.
Thank you for the clarification. Thank you for the clarification.
Though?
That's all I've got to say.
But what defines a transaction?
Thank you for when money exchanges from one party to another. Mr. Schiff, what is one question or one point you would have to bring to Mr. Breedlove's attention that you would like him to address? Question or statement?
Well, we have a lot in common, obviously, philosophically about a lot of things. And, I would just, maybe ask him or have him to consider that gold, has worked for thousands of years, and that the technology that you see that is associated with, digitization and the internet and computers and all that, that doesn't make gold obsolete in any way or any way diminish its role, that it in fact makes gold perform all of the functions that it has performed so successfully over the centuries. It makes it perform it that much better. And that rather than trying to reinvent the wheel and trying to get people to think, oh no, let's just create this new money out of thin air and pretend it has value, and we'll call it Bitcoin, that if he can spend his resources and his efforts to try to move the world back on a gold standard and away from fiat money, and use the technology that's here and use all the advancements to make gold better, to make gold more efficient, and not to try to say that it doesn't work. And, but now this new thing that we've created out of thin air, that this is going to solve all the problems. I have people on my X account, it's Bitcoin fixes it. I mean, people believe that Bitcoin solves every single problem of mankind, that it's all solved simply by ownership of Bitcoin.
Mr. Breedlove, please address these points.
Yeah, I just would, people say I should open my mind to Bitcoin. You should open your mind to the fact that gold still works, and that in capitalism, third parties are trusted all the time. That's why capitalism works. I mean, if you can't trust third parties, you really can't have capitalism. And you don't government. We don't need government to go back on a gold standard. The reason that governments adopted gold was because the people were using gold. The people wanted gold, so the government coined it and used it as money, because they had to use something as money that the people wanted. When the kings were coining gold, it was because that's what the subjects wanted to have. And so they collected taxes in gold, but they were collecting the money that people decided gold was money. No government decided gold was going to be money. The free market decided that gold was going to be money, and then governments adopted that. And so individuals can decide for themselves that they'd rather transact in gold and reject fiat and just buy fiat when they need to pay their taxes. But, between the time they earn the money and the time they pay their taxes to the government, they can completely exist in a non-fiat world where they're negotiating and trading with one another in gold.
Mr. Breedlove, please respond to the points.
Yeah, duly noted. I would actually say that I'm very grateful for getting into Bitcoin and taking me into the what is money rabbit hole. I had kind of been in it before, but Bitcoin took it to a whole nother level, which has really led me to a deeper appreciation of gold and what it is and how it's evolved over time and all of its functions, limitations, etc. It's gotten us this far, even though we've been off the rails for the past 50 years. I would say a lot of civilization up until this point has gold to think in many ways, in terms of lowering people's time preferences and encouraging savings and innovation, etc. And yes, again, not an either or for me. It's sort of a probabilistic weighting. Which future do we see happening? Future outlooks are speculative, right? I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I just sort of weight it at a certain percentage, and I invest my cash balances accordingly. And for me, the best answer to that what is money question were the properties we walked through earlier. the divisibility, durability, recognizability, portability, scarcity. And when I ask myself that question of which tool best satisfies those desired properties in money, I arrive at the conclusion that Bitcoin is my first choice and gold is my second choice, basically.
Yeah,
Gentlemen,
I just
thank
wish
you so-
more people were that are involved in Bitcoin were involved in gold instead. I think it would be much more productive to encourage people to own gold than Bitcoin. And I think ultimately Bitcoin is going to end up giving capitalism a bad name. I think a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money, and that's going to give the government, I told you so. You see, you can't trust the free market. We need more government to protect people from scams like Bitcoin. We need more rules. We need more regulations. And so at the end of the day, we end up freer. Oh, and by the way, we may have shown them how we can have a central bank digital currency. And so at the end of the day, we may have no Bitcoin, but we'll have a central bank digital currency. So we'll give the government even more control over our lives. We'll remove even less of our privacy and make it even easier for the government to create inflation and try to micromanage the economy. So this whole experiment can end very badly, unfortunately.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to clarify your positions on the Zero Hedge debates. My guests have been Peter Schiff, host of the Peter Schiff Show podcast and author of How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes, along with Robert Breedlove, host of What is Money podcast and the author of Bitcoin and the Tyranny of Time Scarcity. Thanks to everyone for watching Zero Hedge debates. Mr. Schiff, Mr. Breedlove, thank you for your time.
Thank you,
Take care,
Peter.
everybody.
Thank you, Keith.